I'm a millionaire, and I let a homeless elderly woman and her daughter live in my garage. But when I entered without knocking, I couldn't believe what she was doing. I've always believed that destiny has a peculiar way of manifesting itself. Sometimes it arrives as a barely perceptible whisper, other times as a deafening shout that shakes the foundations of our existence. For me, Ethan Morgan, heir to a fortune I never asked for, destiny arrived in the form of a disheveled woman sitting on a corner of the bustling city I thought I knew. I remember that day with a clarity that surprises me. The afternoon sun bathed the streets in a golden glow, a spectacle that used to go unnoticed before my eyes, always fixed on my phone screen or on the papers of some pending business. I was driving my latest model sports car, another toy in my collection of distractions, when I saw her. I don't know what made me stop. Perhaps it was the way her shoulders hunched, as if carrying the weight of the world. Or maybe it was her eyes, two deep pools of sadness that seemed to reflect the emptiness I myself felt. Whatever it was, something about her resonated deep within me, awakening an emotion I thought had died long ago. I parked abruptly, ignoring the protests of the drivers behind me. I got out of the car and approached her, feeling my heart beating with an unknown intensity. "Excuse me," I said, surprised by the tremor in my voice. "Do you need help?" She looked up, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. Her eyes, a deep brown, looked at me with a mixture of distrust and curiosity. "Why would a man like you want to help someone like me?" she asked in a hoarse voice, as if she hadn't spoken in a long time. Her question left me speechless. Why indeed? I, Ethan Morgan, the young millionaire, the man who had everything and at the same time had nothing. What could I offer this woman who seemed to have lost everything? "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I'd like to try." She looked at me intently for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, she nodded. "My name is Sarah," she said simply. "Ethan," I replied, extending my hand. She took it cautiously, and I felt an electric current run through my body. At that moment, though I didn't know it, my life was about to change forever. "Sarah," I repeated her name, savoring each syllable. "Would you like to come with me? I can offer you a place to rest tonight." I saw fear and doubt cross her face, but also a glimmer of hope. After a moment that seemed eternal, she nodded slowly. I helped her up and guided her to my car. As I opened the door for her, I couldn't help but notice the looks of astonishment and disapproval from passers-by. The contrast between my designer suit and her worn clothes was evident, but at that moment, none of that mattered. As I drove towards my mansion, I stole glances at my mysterious passenger. Sarah looked out the window with an expression of childlike wonder, as if seeing the city for the first time. I wondered how long it had been since she felt safe, since she had a roof over her head. Upon arriving at my house, I saw how her eyes widened at the sight of the imposing structure. "You live here?" she asked in a whisper. "Yes," I replied, suddenly feeling ashamed of my opulence. "Come, I'll show you to your room." I guided her through the marble hallways, passing rooms full of artwork I had never really bothered to appreciate. Sarah looked at everything with a mixture of awe and something else. Nostalgia, perhaps? Finally, we reached one of the guest rooms. "You can stay here," I told her, opening the door. "There's a private bathroom and clean clothes in the closet. If you need anything, just ask." Sarah slowly entered the room, as if fearing everything would disappear if she moved too quickly. She turned to me, and for the first time, I saw a shy smile on her face. "Thank you, Ethan," she said softly. "I don't know why you're doing this, but thank you." As I closed the door behind me, I realized that I didn't know why I was doing it either. All I knew was that for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something that really mattered. That night, as I prepared for bed, I couldn't help but think about the mysterious woman now sleeping under my roof. Who was Sarah, really? What secrets did she hide behind those sad eyes? And more importantly, why did I feel that my life was about to change forever? With these questions swirling in my head, I fell into an uneasy sleep, not knowing that fate was just beginning to weave its intricate web around us. The days following Sarah's arrival were an emotional roller coaster. I, who had lived for so long in a bubble of apathy and disinterest, now found myself completely fascinated by this enigmatic woman. At first, our coexistence was strange, to say the least. Sarah moved through the house like a ghost, silent and cautious. I, for my part, didn't know how to act. How is one supposed to behave with a homeless woman you've invited to live in your mansion? But little by little, things began to change. It was during a dinner a few days after her arrival when the first significant change occurred. We were sitting in the dining room, a space too large and ostentatious for just two people. I had ordered my chef to prepare a variety of dishes, not knowing what Sarah would like. She looked at the food with a mixture of amazement and something I couldn't identify. "Is something wrong?" I asked, worried that the food wasn't to her liking. Sarah looked up, and for the first time I saw a glimmer of emotion in her eyes. "It's just that this reminds me of something," she said softly. "A long time ago, I used to dine in places like this. The arrangement of the cutlery, the presentation of the dishes, it's like an echo of another life." Her words took me by surprise. "Another life?" I asked, intrigued. She nodded, taking a sip of wine. "There was a time when I too lived surrounded by luxury," she said with a sad smile. "But that was a long time ago." I felt my heart race. It was the first time Sarah had spoken about her past. "What happened?" I asked softly, fearing that my curiosity would make her close up again. Sarah was silent for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally she spoke. "I was an artist, you know, a painter. I was successful, had exhibitions in important galleries, favorable reviews. But then I met someone who changed everything." Her voice broke slightly at the end, and I could see the pain in her eyes. Without thinking, I reached across the table and took her hand. She didn't pull away. "Who was it?" I asked softly. "His name was Victor," she replied, and the name sounded like a curse on her lips. "He was an art collector, charismatic, charming, and completely ruthless." Sarah told me how Victor had seduced her, not only romantically, but professionally. He promised to take her career to new heights, to connect her with the most influential circles in the art world. And for a time he fulfilled those promises. "But it was all a lie," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "Victor was using my talent for his own ends. He made me create forgeries of famous works, which he then sold on the black market." I felt anger growing inside me. "And what happened when you found out?" I asked, though I feared I knew the answer. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I confronted him. I told him I would report him. And he attacked me. He destroyed my paintings, my studio, my life. I had to flee, leave everything behind. And since then I've been wandering, trying to escape my past and myself." The silence that followed her confession was deafening. My mind was spinning, trying to process everything I had heard. Sarah, this woman I had found on the street, was not simply a homeless person. She was a talented artist, a woman who had been betrayed and hurt in the worst possible way. "Sarah," I finally said, squeezing her hand, "I'm so sorry. No one should go through something like that." She looked at me, and I saw a mixture of vulnerability and gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you for listening, Ethan. I hadn't talked about this with anyone in a long time." At that moment, I felt something change between us. We were no longer simply two strangers living under the same roof. We had shared something deep, something that connected us in a way I couldn't explain. "Would you like to paint again?" I asked suddenly, surprising even myself. Sarah looked at me with surprise. I don't know. It's been years since I last held a brush." "I have an art room," I said, feeling an excitement I hadn't experienced in a long time. "It's full of blank canvases and painting materials. If you want, you could use it." I saw how her eyes lit up at the idea, though fear quickly overshadowed them again. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said softly. I stood up and extended my hand to her. "You don't have to do it now, but when you're ready, it will be there for you." Sarah took my hand and stood up. For a moment, we were very close, and I could see every detail of her face. Despite the years of suffering, there was a beauty in her that left me breathless. "Thank you, Ethan," she said softly, "for everything." That night, as I prepared for bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah and her story. I felt a determination I hadn't experienced in years. I wanted to help her. I wanted to see her talent shine again. And more than anything, I wanted to protect her from anything that might hurt her again. Little did I know that Sarah's past was about to catch up with us, and that our lives were about to intertwine in a way neither of us could have imagined. The days turned into weeks, and little by little Sarah began to open up. It was like watching a wilted flower come back to life, slowly but with an undeniable beauty. Every day I discovered something new about her, small details that fascinated me and made me want to know her more. One morning, as we were having breakfast on the terrace, Sarah stared at the garden with a thoughtful expression. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, curious. She smiled, a smile that lit up her face in a way that took my breath away. "Colors," she replied. "How the sunlight makes the leaves shine in different shades of green, how the sky changes from a pale blue to a deep blue. I had forgotten how beautiful the world can be." Her words moved me deeply. I realized that I too had forgotten how to appreciate the beauty that surrounded me. I had been so busy chasing success and wealth that I had lost sight of the simple things that make life worth living. "Sarah," I said softly, "would you like to see the art room today?" She looked at me, and I could see fear and excitement fighting in her eyes. After a moment, she nodded. I guided her through the house until we reached a door I rarely opened. When I pushed it, revealing the spacious room full of blank canvases, easels, and shelves stocked with paints and brushes, I heard Sarah gasp. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered, her eyes scanning the room in awe. It's beautiful." I watched her as she walked slowly around the room, her fingers gently brushing the canvases, caressing the brushes as if they were old friends. I saw how her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. "Do you want to try?" I asked softly, feeling like I was witnessing a crucial moment. Sarah nodded slowly, as if in a trance. She took a brush with a trembling hand and approached a blank canvas. For a moment she stood still, the brush suspended in the air. I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear that her talent had abandoned her. "It's okay," I told her, putting a hand on her shoulder. "It doesn't have to be perfect. Just let it flow." She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to paint. At first her strokes were timid, unsure, but little by little, as if remembering an ancient dance, her movements became more fluid, more confident. I stood there fascinated, watching as the blank canvas came to life under her hands. Vibrant colors exploded on the canvas, abstract shapes that somehow seemed to tell a story. It was as if all the emotion contained within Sarah for years was being released at once. I don't know how much time passed. It could have been minutes or hours. But when she finally lowered the brush, we were both breathless at what she had created. It was an abstract painting, full of swirls of blue and green that reminded me of the sea in a storm. But in the center, emerging from the turmoil, was a golden figure, bright as the sun. It was chaotic and beautiful, full of pain and hope at the same time. "Sarah," I whispered, "it's incredible." She turned to me and I saw tears running down her cheeks, but this time there was a smile on her face, a smile of pure joy. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, her voice broken with emotion. "Thank you for giving this back to me." Without thinking, I hugged her. She tensed for a moment but then relaxed in my arms, sobbing softly. I felt something break inside me too, a barrier I had built around my heart for years. "No, Sarah," I said softly. "Thank you for showing me what true art is." That day marked a turning point. From then on, Sarah spent hours in the art room, painting with a passion and intensity that left me amazed. I watched her, fascinated not only by her talent, but by the transformation that was taking place before my eyes. The fearful and withdrawn woman I had picked up from the street was disappearing, replaced by a vibrant and passionate artist. Her laughter, once so rare, now filled the house. Her eyes shone with a light that made my heart race every time I looked at her. One night, as we were having dinner, Sarah surprised me with a question. "Ethan," she said, looking at me with a mixture of nervousness and determination, Do you think I could exhibit my work again?" I felt a wave of emotion at her words. "Of course you can," I replied without hesitation. "Your work is incredible, Sarah. The world deserves to see it." She smiled, but I could see the shadow of fear in her eyes. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "What if Victor finds out? What if he tries to find me?" I took her hand across the table, feeling a protective fury grow inside me. "I won't let him hurt you," I said firmly. "I promise you, Sarah. You're safe here." She looked at me, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes that made my heart stop. Could it be? No, I told myself. I couldn't allow myself to think that way. Sarah trusted me, depended on me. I couldn't betray that trust. Thank you, Ethan, she said softly. I don't know what I'd do without you. That night, as I prepared for bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah and how much she had changed my life in such a short time. She had brought color to my grey world, had awakened emotions I thought had died long ago. But I also knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The ghost of Victor still lurked in the shadows, and I knew we would have to face him eventually. But as I looked out the window at the starry night, I made a silent promise. I'll protect you, Sarah, I whispered. No matter what happens, I'll be by your side. What I didn't know at that moment was how true that presentiment would turn out to be, and how Victor's words would come back to haunt us in the most unexpected way. The days following the revelation about Sarah's past were a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself fully into organizing an exhibition for Sarah, determined to make her dream of returning to the art world a reality. I contacted gallery owners, critics, collectors, using every connection I had to ensure that Sarah's return to the art world would be spectacular. Sarah, for her part, painted with a fierce intensity. Every day she produced new masterpieces, each more impressive than the last. Watching her work was like witnessing a miracle, and I found myself spending more and more time in the art room, simply observing her. One afternoon, while Sarah was working on a new canvas, I noticed something strange. In the corner of the painting, almost hidden among the swirls of color, was a pattern that looked familiar to me. Sarah, I said, moving closer to look better. What is this? She stopped, looking where I was pointing. For a moment she seemed confused, but then I saw the color drain from her face. I don't know, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I don't remember painting it. I frowned, intrigued. The pattern was subtle but undeniably there. It looked like a series of numbers and letters arranged in a way that reminded me of a code. Is it possible it's something from your past? I asked softly, aware of how delicate the subject was. Sarah stared at the canvas, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. Maybe, she said finally. There was a time when I worked with Victor, I sometimes included details in my paintings, details that only I knew. I felt my heart speed up. What kind of details? She closed her eyes, as if trying to remember something painful. Information about the works Victor was forging. Dates, places, names. I wanted to leave a trail in case I ever had the courage to report him. I gasped. Sarah, I said, taking her hands in mine, do you realize what this means? If you've been including that information in your new paintings, we could have evidence against Victor, she finished, her eyes snapping open. We looked at each other, the magnitude of what we had just discovered falling on us like an avalanche. On one hand, it was an incredible opportunity. With this information, we could finally bring Victor to justice. But on the other hand, this is dangerous, I said, feeling a wave of fear. If Victor finds out these paintings exist, he'll come after me, Sarah said, her voice trembling. Ethan, I'm scared. I hugged her without thinking, feeling how she trembled in my arms. I won't let him hurt you, I said fiercely. I promise you, Sarah, I'll be by your side no matter what. We stayed like that for a moment, embraced in the middle of the art room, surrounded by the paintings that we now knew contained dangerous secrets. When we finally separated, I saw a determination in Sarah's eyes that I hadn't seen before. We have to do something, she said. I can't keep running forever. I nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and fear. We'll do it together, I said. But we have to be careful. We need a plan. That night, while Sarah slept, I stayed awake, my mind spinning with possibilities and dangers. I knew we were about to embark on something dangerous, something that could change everything. But as I looked out the window at the sleeping city, I knew there was no turning back. Sarah had entered my life like a whirlwind, awakening emotions I thought had died long ago. And now, as we prepared to face the demons of her past, I realized that I would do anything to protect her, to make sure she never had to live in fear again. What I didn't know at that moment was that the danger was closer than we imagined, and that our lives were about to take a turn that neither of us could have foreseen. The following days were a whirlwind of frantic activity. While we continued with the preparations for Sarah's exhibition, we also immersed ourselves in the task of deciphering the hidden codes in her paintings. It was delicate and stressful work that kept us awake until late at night, bent over canvases and scribbled notes. It was during one of these late-night sessions that something happened that would change the course of our lives forever. We were in the art room, surrounded by paintings and cups of cold coffee, when we heard the doorbell ring. I started, looking at the clock. It was almost 2 in the morning. "Who could it be at this hour?" Sarah asked, fear evident in her voice. "Stay here," I told her, feeling a wave of apprehension. "I'll go see." I went down the stairs with my heart pounding in my chest. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with a man I had never seen before. He was tall and thin, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce through me. "Ethan Morgan?" he asked, his voice tense and urgent. I nodded, cautious. "Who are you?" "My name is Alex," he said, looking nervously over my shoulder. I was Sarah's friend. I need to talk to her." "It's urgent." I felt my body tense. "I don't know who you're talking about," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. Alex looked at me with a mixture of frustration and desperation. "Please," he said in a low voice. "I know she's here. I need to warn her. Victor, he's back. He's looking for her." I felt the ground open up beneath my feet. Victor. The man who had destroyed Sarah's life, who had forced her to flee and hide for years. And now he was back. "Ethan." I heard Sarah's voice behind me. I turned to see her standing on the stairs, her face pale with fear. "Let him in." "I know, Alex." With a heavy heart, I opened the door wider and let Alex in. The 3 of us headed to the living room, a tense silence falling over us. "Sarah," Alex said, his voice broken with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I've been trying to find you for years." Sarah looked at him, her eyes full of a mixture of joy and fear. "Alex," she said softly, How did you find me?" "I heard rumors," he said, "about a new artist who was going to have an exhibition. When I saw the images of your works, I knew it was you. And I knew I had to warn you." "Warn me?" Sarah asked. Though from her tone I knew she already knew the answer. Alex nodded grimly. "Victor is back in town. He's been asking questions, showing your photo. He's determined to find you, Sarah." I saw the color drain from Sarah's face. She swayed slightly and I rushed to her side, taking her arm to support her. "What are we going to do?" she whispered, looking at me with eyes full of panic. I felt a wave of determination. "We'll face him," I said firmly. "Together. We have the evidence in your paintings. We can bring him to justice." Alex looked at us, confused. "Evidence? What are you talking about?" Quickly, we explained to him about the hidden codes in Sarah's paintings, the information we had discovered about Victor's illegal activities. Alex listened attentively, his eyes widening more and more. This is incredible," he said finally, "but also extremely dangerous. If Victor finds out these paintings exist—" "He won't," I said firmly. "We're going to protect Sarah and these paintings at all costs." Sarah looked at me, and I saw a mixture of gratitude and something else in her eyes, something that made my heart leap in my chest. "Ethan," she said softly, "I can't ask you to put yourself in danger for me." I took her hand in mine, looking into her eyes. "You're not asking me, Sarah. I'm choosing to stand by your side. I won't let you face this alone." Alex watched us, a thoughtful expression on his face. "We'll need a plan," he said finally. "Victor is dangerous and has connections. We can't just go to the police without being sure they'll believe us." I nodded, feeling the weight of the situation on my shoulders. "You're right. We need to gather all the information we can, make sure our case is solid." We spent the next few hours discussing strategies, analyzing every possible angle. Alex turned out to be an invaluable source of information, providing us with details about Victor's operations that even Sarah didn't know. As we talked, I couldn't help but notice how Sarah leaned on me, seeking comfort in my presence. I felt a mixture of protection and something deeper, something I didn't dare name yet. It was almost dawn when we finally decided to rest a bit. I accompanied Alex to one of the guest rooms, while Sarah retired to her room. Before I could go to mine, Sarah stopped me in the hallway. "Ethan," she said softly, "thank you for everything." I looked at her, feeling my heart swell with emotion. "You don't have to thank me, Sarah. I couldn't finish the sentence. Suddenly, Sarah leaned in and kissed me. It was a soft kiss, almost shy, but I felt as if an electric current ran through my entire body. When we separated, I saw a gleam in her eyes that left me breathless. "Good night, Ethan," she whispered, before disappearing into her room. I stood there stunned, touching my lips where hers had been moments before. In that instant, I knew my life had changed irrevocably. I wasn't simply helping Sarah anymore. I was in love with her. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Between the preparations for the exhibition and our efforts to gather evidence against Victor, we barely had time to breathe. But in every free moment, my thoughts returned to that kiss, to the way Sarah now looked at me, with a mixture of vulnerability and something deeper. One afternoon, while we were working on deciphering more codes in Sarah's paintings, I received a call that chilled my blood. "Mr. Morgan," said a soft voice on the other end of the line, "my name is Victor Reeves. I believe we have a common interest to discuss." I felt my heart stop. Victor, the man who had tormented Sarah for years, who had forced her to live in the shadows. And now he was on the phone, talking to me as if we were old friends. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Victor laughed softly. "Come now, Mr. Morgan. We both know you're protecting Sarah. I admire your loyalty, I really do, but I'm afraid you're getting involved in something you don't fully understand." I felt a wave of fury. "What I understand," I said through gritted teeth, "is that you destroyed an innocent woman's life. And if you think I'm going to let you hurt her again, you're very wrong." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. When Victor spoke again, his voice had lost all trace of kindness. "Be careful, Mr. Morgan. You're playing a dangerous game. I suggest you reconsider your position. Let's say $1 million for you to step aside and let me handle this matter with Sarah." I felt my blood boil. "You can keep your money," I spat. "I'm not going to betray Sarah." "What a pity," Victor said, his voice cold as ice. "I was hoping we could resolve this in a civilized manner. But if you insist on being an obstacle, well, I have ways of dealing with obstacles." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there holding the phone, feeling as if the world was closing in around me. "Ethan?" Sarah's voice snapped me out of my trance. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, her face full of concern. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." For a moment, I considered not telling her. I wanted to protect her, to spare her more pain, but I knew I couldn't lie to her, not now. "It was Victor," I said softly, watching the color drain from her face. "He knows you're here, Sarah, and he offered me money to hand you over." Sarah staggered, and I rushed to her side, holding her. What did you tell him?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked into her eyes, seeing the fear and vulnerability in them. "I told him to go to hell," I replied firmly. "Sarah, I'm not going to leave you. No matter what Victor does, I'll be by your side." She looked at me, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. "Ethan," she whispered, "I love you." At that moment, with danger looming over us and an uncertain future ahead, I kissed her. It was a desperate kiss, full of fear and love and silent promises. When we separated, I saw a determination in Sarah's eyes that I hadn't seen before. "We're going to face him," she said firmly. "Together." I nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew one thing for certain. I would do anything to protect Sarah, to make sure she never had to live in fear again. What we didn't know at that moment was that the real danger was just beginning, and that the secrets we were about to uncover would change our lives forever. The days following Victor's call were an emotional roller coaster. We worked tirelessly, Sarah, Alex, and I, deciphering the codes in the paintings and gathering all the information we could about Victor's illegal activities. It was during one of these work sessions that something happened that would change the course of our lives forever. We were examining one of Sarah's most recent paintings, a canvas full of dark tones and swirls of color that seemed to hide secrets in every brushstroke. Alex was bent over the painting, his eyes narrowed as he tried to decipher a particularly complex pattern. Suddenly he straightened up, his face pale as if he had seen a ghost. This can't be," he muttered. "What's wrong?" I asked, feeling a wave of anxiety. Alex looked at us, his eyes moving between Sarah and me with an expression of shock. "This code, It doesn't just talk about Victor's activities. There's information about a child, a baby born 30 years ago. I felt my heart stop. 30 years, my exact age. I looked at Sarah, seeing the color drain from her face. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It can't be." Alex continued, his voice trembling slightly. "The code talks about a baby born to Sarah and a man named Michael, a baby that was given up for adoption to protect it from Victor." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt as if the world had stopped, as if everything I thought I knew about myself was crumbling. "Ethan," Sarah's voice snapped me out of my trance. I looked at her, seeing tears running down her cheeks. I didn't know. I didn't remember. Victor, he made me forget. He drugged me, manipulated me. I thought I had lost the baby." I staggered backward, feeling as if the ground was opening up beneath my feet. Are you saying you're my mother?" Sarah nodded, sobbing now. "Michael was the love of my life. Victor killed him out of jealousy, out of revenge. I gave you up for adoption to protect you, to keep you safe from Victor." My mind was spinning. My whole life, my whole identity, everything I thought I knew about myself, it was all a lie. "My parents," I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "The ones who died when I was 20. "Must have been your adoptive parents," Alex said softly. "They probably knew the truth but kept it a secret to protect you." I collapsed into a chair, feeling as if the whole world had turned upside down. Sarah, my mother, the woman I had rescued from the street, whom I had fallen in love with. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," Sarah sobbed, approaching me but stopping as if afraid to touch me. "I never wanted to abandon you. I wanted to protect you. I've loved you every day of my life." I looked at her, seeing the pain and regret in her eyes. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream and curse at the injustice of it all. But looking at her, seeing the suffering on her face, I only felt a deep sadness and an overwhelming need to comfort her. I stood up and, without thinking, hugged her. She tensed for a moment, surprised, but then melted into my arms, sobbing against my chest. "I forgive you," I whispered, feeling my own tears falling. "It wasn't your fault. You did what you thought was best to protect me." We stayed like that for what seemed like an eternity, mother and son reunited after 30 years of separation. When we finally separated, I saw a mixture of love and pain in Sarah's eyes that broke my heart. "What do we do now?" Alex asked, breaking the silence. I took a deep breath, feeling a determination I had never experienced before. "Now," I said, my voice firm, "we go after Victor. Not just for what he did to you, Sarah, my mother, but for what he did to all of us. For robbing us of 30 years together." Sarah looked at me and I saw a flash of pride in her eyes. "Together," she said, taking my hand. "Together," I repeated, squeezing her hand. At that moment, with the weight of 30 years of secrets finally revealed, I felt something change inside me. I was no longer just Ethan Morgan, the lonely young millionaire. I was Sarah and Michael's son, a man with a mission. What we didn't know at that moment was that Victor was closer than we thought, and that the battle we were about to fight would be the hardest of our lives. The days following the revelation about my true identity were a whirlwind of emotions and frantic activity. While I grappled with the revelation that Sarah was my biological mother, we also threw ourselves fully into our efforts to expose Victor. Alex proved to be an invaluable ally. His knowledge of the art world and his connections provided us with crucial information about Victor's current operations. We discovered that he was planning a major auction where he would sell a collection of forged works worth millions of dollars. "This is our opportunity," I said during one of our strategy meetings. "If we can expose the forgery during the auction, in front of all the buyers and the press, it would be the end of Victor," Sarah finished, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and fear. We worked day and night, preparing for the event. I used my connections in the business world to secure invitations to the auction. Sarah worked tirelessly on a new painting, one that would contain irrefutable evidence of Victor's illegal activities. The night before the auction, as we reviewed our plan one last time, Sarah stopped me. "Ethan," she said softly, taking my hand, "I want you to know, No matter what happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you. And I love you, not just as the woman I thought I was when we met, but as your mother." I felt my heart swell with emotion. Despite the confusion and pain of the last few days, I knew that what I felt for Sarah was real. It was a complicated love, transformed by the truth but no less deep. "I love you too," I said, squeezing her hand. "And we're going to get through this together." The morning of the auction arrived too soon. I dressed in my best suit, feeling the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. Sarah wore an elegant dress, her hair pulled back in a sophisticated bun. It was hard to believe that this beautiful, confident woman was the same person I had found on the street months ago. When we arrived at the auction venue, I felt my heart racing. The hall was filled with the elite of the art world, wealthy collectors and influential critics. And there, at the center of it all, was Victor. I recognized him immediately, though I had never seen him in person. He was tall and elegant in an impeccable suit and with a charming smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. When he saw us enter, I saw a flash of surprise on his face, quickly replaced by a mask of courtesy. "Mr. Morgan," he said, approaching us with a glass of champagne in hand. "What a pleasant surprise. And I see you've brought a very special guest." His eyes fell on Sarah, and I saw how she tensed beside me. Instinctively, I stepped forward, placing myself between them. "Mr. Reeves," I said, keeping my voice firm, "we're here to enjoy the auction, nothing more." Victor smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course," he said softly. "Enjoy the evening." He walked away, mingling with the crowd, but I could feel his eyes on us throughout the night. The auction began, and we watched with growing tension as the forged works sold for astronomical sums. Alex, who had infiltrated among the event staff, gave us discreet updates through a hidden earpiece. Finally, the moment we had been waiting for arrived. The last piece of the night, the crown jewel of Victor's collection, was presented. "Now," I whispered to Sarah. She nodded, her face pale but determined. She stood up, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. "That painting is a forgery," she said, her voice strong and clear. "And I can prove it." The silence that followed was deafening. I saw Victor's face contort with fury, but before he could say anything, Sarah continued. "I've brought one of my own works," she said, pointing to the painting we had brought with us. "A work that contains irrefutable evidence of Mr. Reeves's illegal activities." Chaos erupted in the room. The guests murmured and moved restlessly, while Victor advanced towards us, his face a mask of fury. "Guards!" he shouted. "Get these imposters out of here!" But before anyone could move, the doors of the hall burst open. A group of police officers entered, led by a detective I recognized from my previous contacts. "Victor Reeves," the detective said, his voice resonating in the sudden silence. "You're under arrest for fraud and forgery." I saw the color drain from Victor's face. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to resist, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. As the police handcuffed him, Victor looked me directly in the eyes. "Don't think this is over, Morgan," he hissed. "I have powerful friends, and I know your secret, the secret of your true identity." I felt my blood freeze. How could he know? But before he could say anything more, the police took him away. The rest of the night passed in a blur of statements to the police and questions from journalists who had been alerted to the scandal. When we were finally able to leave, I was exhausted but euphoric. "We did it," I said to Sarah as we got into the car. "It's over." She smiled at me, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "What did Victor mean about your true identity?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "I don't know," I said. "But it doesn't matter. What matters is that we're safe. That you're safe." Sarah took my hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you, Ethan." "For everything." As we drove back home, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. We had won an important battle, but something told me the war wasn't over yet. What I didn't know at that moment was how true that presentiment would turn out to be, and how Victor's words would come back to haunt us in the most unexpected way. The days following the auction were a whirlwind of activity. The news of Victor's arrest and the forgery scandal spread like wildfire through the art world. Sarah and I found ourselves inundated with requests for interviews and statements. But amidst all the chaos, I couldn't stop thinking about Victor's last words. How could he know about my true identity? And what else did he know that he hadn't told us? A week after Victor's arrest, I received a call that would change everything once again. "Mr. Morgan," a grave voice said on the other end of the line, "this is Detective Johnson. I need you to come to the station. There's something you need to see." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What is it about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "It's better if you see for yourself," the detective finally said, "and it would be good if you brought Mrs. Sarah with you." I hung up the phone with a growing sense of dread. When I told Sarah about the call, I saw the fear reflected in her eyes. "Do you think it has to do with what Victor said?" she asked softly. I nodded. "There's only one way to find out." The trip to the police station was tense and silent. When we arrived, Detective Johnson was waiting for us. He led us to an interrogation room where there was a thick folder on the table. "What I'm about to show you," the detective said, his voice serious, "will change your lives forever. Are you sure you want to know?" I looked at Sarah, seeing the determination in her eyes despite the fear. I took her hand and nodded to the detective. Johnson opened the folder and began to pull out documents, birth certificates, medical reports, old photographs. As I examined them, I felt my world wobble. "According to these documents," the detective said, "you, Mr. Morgan, are not an only child as you believed. You have a twin sister." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "A sister? How was that possible?" Sarah let out a choked sob. "2 babies," she whispered. I remember giving birth to 2 babies. But Victor, he told me one had died." The detective nodded grimly. "It seems Victor separated the twins at birth. Mr. Morgan was given up for adoption, as you already knew, but the girl, what happened to her?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Johnson pulled out one last photograph. It was an image of a young woman with a face that was a mirror of mine. "Her name is Emily," the detective said, "and she's been in Victor's custody all these years." I felt the world stop. A sister, a twin who had grown up under the control of the man who had destroyed our lives. "Where is she now?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The detective shook his head. "We don't know. She disappeared shortly after Victor's arrest, but she left this for you." He handed us an envelope. With trembling hands, I opened it and pulled out a note. "Ethan and Sarah," it read. "If you're reading this, it means you finally know the truth. I've spent my entire life under Victor's control, but now I'm free. I want to meet you, but I need time. I'll find you when I'm ready. With love, Emily." I looked at Sarah, seeing the tears running down her cheeks. Without words, I hugged her, feeling my own tears fall. We left the police station in a state of shock. We had a new mission now, to find Emily and reunite our family. What we didn't know at that moment was that Emily was closer than we thought, and that the path to our reunion would be filled with dangers we could never have imagined. The days following the revelation about Emily were an emotional roller coaster. Sarah oscillated between the joy of knowing her daughter was alive and the pain of having lost 30 years with her. I, for my part, felt overwhelmed by the idea of having a twin sister whose existence I had no idea about. We threw ourselves fully into the search for Emily. I hired the best private investigators, used every contact I had in the business and art world. But Emily seemed to have disappeared without a trace. One night, as we were reviewing the scarce information we had managed to gather, Sarah surprised me with a question. "Ethan," she said softly, "do you think she'll want us in her life? After everything that's happened?" I looked at her, seeing fear and hope fighting in her eyes. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but we have to try. She's our family." Sarah nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. I hugged her, feeling the weight of 30 years of secrets and losses between us. It was Alex who finally gave us the clue we needed. He arrived one afternoon, panting and with eyes bright with excitement. "I've seen her," he said breathlessly. "Emily, she's here in the city." I felt my heart race. "Where?" I asked, jumping to my feet. "At an art gallery downtown," Alex replied. "She was looking at one of Sarah's paintings. I recognized her from the photo you showed me." I looked at Sarah, seeing the determination in her eyes. "Let's go," I said. The trip downtown was the longest of my life. When we finally arrived at the gallery, I felt like my heart was going to leap out of my chest. And there she was, standing in front of one of Sarah's most recent paintings, a woman who could have been my reflection in a mirror. The same dark hair, the same green eyes. Emily. We approached slowly, afraid of scaring her. When we were a few steps away, she turned. For a moment we looked at each other in silence. I could see the shock in her eyes, the recognition, the fear and hope. "Emily?" Sarah said softly, her voice broken with emotion. Emily looked at us, her eyes filling with tears. "Mom," she whispered. "Ethan." And then, without warning, she threw herself into our arms. We embraced there, in the middle of the gallery, 30 years of separation dissolving in a moment of pure connection. When we finally separated, Emily looked at us with a mixture of joy and sadness. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to look for you. I was afraid. Victor told me so many lies about you." "It's not your fault," I said, taking her hand. "What matters is that we're together now." We spent the next few hours in a nearby cafe, catching up on our lives. Emily told us about growing up under Victor's control, about how she had discovered the truth shortly before his arrest. "When they arrested him," she said, "I knew it was my chance to be free, but I was afraid to face you. I needed time to process everything." "We understand," Sarah said softly. "What matters is that you're here now." As we talked, I felt a peace that I didn't know was missing fall into place in my heart. We had a lot to overcome, a lot to heal, but we were together. We were a family. What we didn't know at that moment was that our reunion hadn't gone unnoticed. In the shadows, someone was watching us, someone who wasn't willing to let our newly discovered happiness last. The days following our encounter with Emily were like a dream. We spent every moment together, sharing stories, laughing, crying, making up for lost time. Sarah radiated happiness, finally having both her children by her side. But happiness never lasts forever, especially when there are dark secrets lurking in the shadows. One afternoon, while we were all at my house, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with Detective Johnson. "Mr. Morgan," he said, his face grim, "we have a problem." We all gathered in the living room as Johnson explained the situation. Victor had escaped from police custody during his transfer to prison. "We believe he has outside help," Johnson said, "and we have reason to believe he's coming for you." I felt a chill run down my spine. I looked at Sarah and Emily, seeing the fear reflected in their eyes. "What can we do?" I asked, feeling a fierce determination grow inside me. I wasn't going to let Victor separate us again. "We'll put you under police protection," Johnson said, "but I need you to be alert. Victor is dangerous and will stop at nothing." The following days were tense. We lived in a constant state of alert, jumping at every unexpected sound. But despite the fear, we refused to separate. We had spent too much time apart to allow Victor to divide us again. It was Emily who finally proposed a plan. "We have to confront him," she said one night as we were having dinner. "On our terms. It's the only way to end this once and for all." Sarah paled at the idea, but I saw the determination in my sister's eyes and knew she was right. "What do you suggest?" I asked. Emily smiled, a smile that reminded me unsettlingly of Victor. "We set a trap for him, using the art that brought us together in the first place." The plan was risky, but brilliant in its simplicity. We would announce a special exhibition of Sarah's works, including a never-before-seen piece that supposedly contained the key to unmasking Victor's accomplices in the art world. "He won't be able to resist," Emily said. "He'll come to try to destroy the evidence." And so we set to work. Sarah painted day and night, creating a masterpiece that would serve as bait. I used my connections to organize the exhibition in record time. Emily worked with the police, making sure every detail of the plan was perfectly coordinated. The night of the exhibition arrived too soon. The air was charged with tension as guests began to arrive. Sarah, Emily, and I moved among the crowd, our nerves on edge, waiting for any sign of Victor. It was close to midnight when we saw him. He entered through a side door, his face hidden under the shadow of a hat, but we recognized him instantly. "He's here," I whispered into the hidden microphone I was wearing. I watched as Victor moved stealthily towards the centerpiece of the exhibition, the painting that supposedly contained the evidence against him. Just as he was about to reach it, the lights went out. When they came back on seconds later, Victor was surrounded by a circle of police officers, Johnson at the lead. "It's over, Victor," the detective said. "This time there's no escape." But Victor didn't surrender without a fight. With a quick movement, he pulled out a gun and aimed directly at Sarah. "If I can't have her," he shouted, "no one will." Everything happened in slow motion. I saw Victor's finger tense on the trigger. Without thinking, I lunged forward, placing myself between Victor and Sarah. I heard the shot. I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder, and then darkness. When I regained consciousness, I was in a hospital bed. Sarah and Emily were by my side, their faces marked by fatigue and worry, but also by relief. What happened?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "You saved my life," Sarah said softly, taking my hand. "Victor is in custody. This time he won't escape." Emily smiled, squeezing my other hand. "It's over, brother. We're free." As I lay there, surrounded by the two women who meant the most to me in the world, I felt a peace I had never experienced before. We had been through hell, but we had come out the other side, together. "What now?" I asked softly. Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Now we live, Ethan, as a family." And so, as the sun rose on a new day, marking the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, I knew that no matter what the future held for us, we would face it together, as mother and children, as siblings, as a family that was finally complete.